It's the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police National Use of Force Framework.
Okay.
It's in the year 2000,
All right.
but it's still super relevant today.
I can imagine.
Have you ever wondered, like, how police officers across Canada are trained to handle those really intense situations?
Yeah, for sure. Those potentially dangerous ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this document kind of gives us a peek behind the curtain.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's like a roadmap for how officers assess risks and make decisions in those high-pressure moments.
It's fascinating to see how they choose the most appropriate response.
And get this, it was developed by, like, experts from all across Canada.
Really?
Yeah, from all these different police services.
So a truly national approach.
Exactly. So it's not just some regional thing. It's like a shared commitment to consistency across the country.
I see.
Okay, so let's get into it.
All right.
The document starts by taking us back in time a little bit.
Oh,
For Use of Force Models 101.
nice.
So apparently those early models from the 70s, mostly from the U.S., they were really rigid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like flow charts and step-by-step instructions, that kind of thing.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, they were often criticized for being way too simplistic.
I can see why.
They didn't really capture, like, the unpredictable nature of these real-life encounters.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit every situation into a neat little box. Right?
Exactly. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
So the Canadian model, which came about in the late 90s,
Okay.
it aimed to be a lot more dynamic.
That makes sense.
Yeah, much more realistic.
Recognizing
that things can change super quickly.
For sure.
And officers need to adapt on the fly.
Yeah, that adaptability is crucial.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because a situation can escalate or de-escalate so fast.
Oh, in a heartbeat.
Okay, so now let's get to the heart of this framework.
Right.
The 6 guiding principles.
Okay.
Now, I know, like, a list of principles might not sound that exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But trust me, these are the foundation
Okay.
of everything that follows.
So kind of like the North Star for officers, right?
Exactly. Guiding their decision-making.
Cool.
Okay, so here they are. Preserving and protecting life. Public safety as the primary objective. Officer safety for public safety.
I like that one.
Yeah, me too.
Interesting.
The framework is a guide, not a replacement for the law, consideration of federal statute law and current case law, and finally, not dictating policy to any agency.
Okay, wow, that's a lot to remember.
I know, right?
But that officer safety for public safety one really stood out to me.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a connection I hadn't really considered before.
Right. Like, you can't really protect the public if you as an officer aren't safe yourself.
Yeah, it makes you realize that an officer's safety is crucial for everyone involved.
Exactly.
It's not just about the officer, it's about the community they're protecting.
Okay, so now for the fun part.
All right.
There's this really cool graphic in the framework.
Oh, cool. Visual aid.
Yeah, it visually represents how officers are trained to approach these situations.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So picture this. There's this inner circle.
Right.
And that represents the situation.
Gotcha.
And inside that circle, there's this assess, plan, act cycle constantly happening.
A constant cycle.
Yeah, so it's meant to show that officers are constantly evaluating what's going on, taking in information, and adjusting their approach.
Like they're always on their toes.
Exactly.
Right.
And then right next to that inner circle, there's another circle.
Okay.
And this one shows those subject behaviors.
Right, the cooperative, resistant, assaultive.
Yep, all of that.
And even grievous bodily harm or death.
Exactly. Ranging from totally cooperative all the way up to those really serious situations.
And it's not always so clear-cut, right?
You're right.
Those lines between those behaviors can get pretty blurry.
For sure.
And an officer's perception plays a big part in determining where a subject's actions actually fall on that spectrum.
It's not like there's a behavior meter or something, right?
Uh-huh.
It's much more nuanced than that.
Absolutely it is.
And to show that, the graphic uses these cool color gradients and overlaps.
Ooh, I like visuals.
Yeah, it really highlights how fluid these encounters can be.
Things can change so quickly.
Oh, yeah, in a heartbeat.
Right.
And then to show the range of possible responses,
Okay.
there's this outer ring in the graphic
Right.
that outlines the officer's options.
So things like officer presence.
Yep.
Communication, physical control,
Mm-hmm.
intermediate weapons.
And as a last resort, lethal force.
It's interesting how those options aren't always completely separate.
That's true.
There can be overlap, right?
Yeah.
With officers using multiple options at the same time.
Depending on how the situation unfolds.
Exactly. It's not like a multiple choice quiz.
Right. It's way more complex.
It's all about adapting.
to those ever-changing dynamics.
Look at that.
All right. So we've got the big picture now.
Okay.
Let's zoom in on the details a little.
Sounds good.
The threefold assessment process. This is how officers break down a situation and figure out the best way to respond.
So it's a framework, not a rigid set of rules.
Exactly.
Okay.
The first part focuses on the situation itself.
Okay, the environment and everything.
And this is where things get super interesting, because officers are trained to be incredibly observant.
Like detectives.
Kinda. They pick up on all sorts of details that most of us would probably miss.
So they're considering things like the time of day, location, weather conditions,
All of that.
even their own position in relation to the subject
Yeah.
and how many people are involved.
Exactly. Both subjects and officers.
Wow, they have to think about a lot.
They do.
They also factor in any prior knowledge they might have about the subject too,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
It's
And you know what else?
what's that?
They're even trained to spot potential attack signs,
Oh, wow. Like what kinds of things?
like ignoring commands, asking repetitive questions, or having an aggressive stance.
So they're like reading body language,
It's almost like that, yeah.
trying to anticipate what might happen next.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
But that's just the beginning.
There's more.
Oh, yeah, the assessment process goes even deeper.
I can't wait to hear about it.
Well, you'll have to wait for the next part of our deep dive.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Stay tuned.
I will. All right, so we left off talking about that first part of the assessment.
Right, figuring out the situation.
But there's more to it than just like the environment.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Now we got to look at the individual involved,
Okay.
the subject, as the document calls them.
Right.
This is the second part of the assessment,
Okay.
and it's all about understanding their behavior.
And that's where those 5 categories come in.
Right, the cooperative resistant assaultive,
Yep, those ones.
and even grievous bodily harm or death.
It's interesting, though, how you mentioned those categories aren't always super clear-cut.
Yeah, it's not as easy as just checking boxes.
It's true. You could have someone who's, like, verbally resistant,
Mm-hmm.
but not actually physically threatening.
I see.
Or maybe they're passively resisting by going limp,
Oh, yeah, that's tricky.
which creates a whole different challenge for the officer.
So how do they even navigate that?
That's a good question.
It seems like there's a lot of room for interpretation.
There is.
Yeah.
And that's where the third part of the assessment comes in.
Okay.
The officer's perception and tactical considerations.
So now we're factoring in the human element,
Exactly.
like the officer's own experiences,
Yep.
their training, even their gut feelings.
All of that. The framework acknowledges that each officer brings their own unique perspective to the situation.
Makes sense.
Their size and strength, their past experiences,
Right.
even their emotional state that day.
Wow.
It can all influence how they perceive the threat level.
It's like that saying, we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are.
Exactly. And on top of that,
Okay.
there are tactical considerations too.
Oh, right. Like what kind of things?
Well, does the officer have backup?
Okay.
Is there cover available if things escalate? What are the agency's specific policies?
So it's about the bigger picture,
Yeah.
not just the one-on-one interaction.
You got it. All those external factors can impact the officer's decision-making.
And one of the most important tactical considerations, I think,
Yes.
is the option to disengage.
You mean like walk away?
Yeah, even if the situation feels tense.
Essentially, yes. The framework emphasizes that an officer's primary duty is to protect life.
Okay,
Everyone's life, including their own.
that's important.
So sometimes the safest and smartest course of action is to create distance, reassess,
Right.
maybe call for backup.
It's about de-escalating things.
Exactly. Choosing the option that minimizes risk for everyone.
Okay, so let's say the officer has gone through all 3 parts of this assessment.
Right.
They've sized up the situation,
Yeah.
considered the subject's behavior,
Uh-huh.
and factored in their own perceptions and those tactical options.
What happens next?
That's when they choose a course of action.
Right.
And that's where those use of force options come in.
That outer ring on the graphic?
The one that goes from officer presence all the way to lethal force.
Exactly. But remember how we said those subject behaviors aren't always neatly separated?
Uh-huh.
Well, it's the same with those options.
I see.
There can be overlap, with officers using multiple options at the same time or shifting between them as the situation changes.
So they're constantly adapting their approach.
Got it.
Nothing is static in these encounters.
Okay, so let's break down these options a bit.
Sounds good.
We've got officer presence, which isn't technically force,
Right.
but it can definitely have an impact.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes just seeing a uniformed officer or a marked patrol car can de-escalate a situation.
It's a reminder that there's a structure of authority.
Yeah, it's like that feeling you get when you see a speed limit sign.
Oh, yeah.
You might not even be speeding,
Uh-huh.
but you check your speedometer just in case.
Exactly.
And then there's communication,
Okay.
which can be verbal or nonverbal.
So using words and body language to try and resolve things peacefully.
It's like trying to defuse a bomb with your words.
Uh-huh. I like that analogy. You want to avoid anything that could trigger an explosion.
Right, and it shows how important good communication is for law enforcement.
It really is. But sometimes words just aren't enough.
Okay,
And that's where physical control techniques come in.
so this is where things get more hands-on.
Yes, and the framework distinguishes between soft and hard techniques.
Okay, what's the difference?
Soft techniques are about controlling the situation with minimal force,
I see.
like escort holds or joint locks.
Okay.
Techniques designed to guide and control movement without causing too much pain.
So what about those hard techniques then?
These are more about stopping a subject's actions quickly,
Okay.
which might involve strikes or forceful takedowns.
Got it.
Imagine a situation where someone is actively attacking another person,
Uh-huh.
and the officer needs to intervene immediately.
To prevent serious injury.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a spectrum of force.
Right, depending on the level of resistance.
And the immediacy of the threat.
But what if those techniques aren't enough?
That's when we move into the realm of intermediate weapons.
Like batons and pepper spray.
Yep, or tasers. These are less lethal options.
Less lethal, meaning there's still a risk of harm.
Exactly. No use of force is entirely without risk.
That's a good point.
And that brings us to the final option,
Lethal force.
the use of firearms.
Right, or any method that could result in death.
This is the absolute last resort.
It's a heavy decision.
It is. The decision to use lethal force is never taken lightly.
Right?
And the framework provides guidelines to help officers navigate those incredibly difficult situations.
So to recap the Canadian use of force framework,
Yes.
it's all about equipping officers with the knowledge to make informed decisions.
In those stressful, rapidly changing situations
It's a dynamic system
that recognizes the complexities of human behavior.
and prioritizes that constant assessment and adaptation.
There's no room for rigidity in this line of work.
And it highlights that balance
Yes.
between protecting public safety and upholding the law,
It's about recognizing that each encounter is unique
and requires careful consideration,
of all those factors.
which is why context is so important.
When we're talking about use of force,
It's never about judging an officer's actions from the sidelines.
without understanding the full picture.
It's easy to second guess when you're not the one in that situation.
This framework helps us understand those complexities.
What officers are dealing with.
It's not about excusing bad behavior
Right.
or condoning excessive force.
It's about providing a framework for understanding
the factors at play.
in those high-pressure moments
It's a tool for officers and the public
to bridge that gap.
and foster understanding and transparency.
That's a perfect segue into our final thoughts on this deep dive.
But we'll save those for our last segment.
Stay tuned! Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive.
Into the Canadian use of force framework.
We've covered a lot.
From those guiding principles
To the threefold assessment process.
and those use of force options.
It's been fascinating.
Really eye-opening.
I have like a whole new appreciation for the challenges officers face.
I think that's one of the most important takeaways.
Right.
It's so easy to judge based on like snippets of information.
Or viral videos.
Exactly.
But this framework encourages us to think about the bigger picture, to remember that we're often only seeing a tiny part of what happened.
And that the officer was making split-second decisions
Under pressure.
in a really dynamic situation.
Which also makes me think about training,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
the importance of ongoing training for officers.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
They need the skills to handle these situations effectively.
But this framework
Mhm.
was developed back in 2000.
Right.
How has it held up over time?
That's a great question.
The world has changed so much.
And it's important to remember that this framework isn't static.
So it's not like they just shelved it
No, not at all.
Oh.
There have been updates and revisions.
to keep it current.
Exactly. To reflect best practices.
What about technology?
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
It seems like every police interaction is being filmed these days.
Body cameras have changed the game.
For sure.
They've added a whole new layer of accountability.
And transparency.
It's like having a neutral observer right there in the middle of everything.
It makes you think, though.
How so?
Knowing you're being recorded probably changes your behavior,
Oh, absolutely.
even just a little.
It's human nature.
So could that lead to officers being more hesitant in certain situations?
That's the question, isn't it?
Because you want officers to be accountable,
Of course.
but you don't want them to hesitate when they need to act.
It's a tough balance.
It's a conversation that's constantly evolving,
With new challenges and considerations all the time.
which is why it's so important to stay informed
To dig deeper, explore those different perspectives.
and challenge our own assumptions.
Couldn't agree more.
So we encourage all of you listening
Yes.
to keep learning about this topic.
Look into the policies in your own community.
Engage in those conversations about policing and public safety.
The more we understand,
The better equipped we are
to create safer communities.
for everyone.